The medicine lie. Why cures are no longer profitable. The dean slid the letter across the desk and didn't say a word. By spring, their medical school would be shuttered. Students would scatter, faculty would be jobless, and a neighborhood clinic that trained black physicians would go dark. The letter cited standards, laboratory capacity, and hospital ties. It might as well have said, fall in line or disappear. To understand why a single report could close a century of schools, we go back to 1910, when an education audit, funded by America's richest foundations, rewired medicine. Follow the money, the rules, and the definitions of science that turned cures into compliance. The audit that changed everything, the Flexner Report. It starts with a quiet commission and a loud promise. In 1910, the Carnegie Foundation published Bulletin Number 4, better known as the Flexner Report, written by an outsider to medicine named Abraham Flexner. On paper, it was simple. Survey every medical school, grade quality, set standards. In practice, it became a lever. Standards weren't just advice, they were conditions that could turn off the lights. Flexner's brief rewarded one model: university-based programs with full-time faculty, well-funded laboratories, and formal hospital affiliations. Apprenticeship routes that had trained local practitioners for decades were marked as commercial. Homeopathic and eclectic colleges, schools that taught plant-based materia medica alongside anatomy, were labeled substandard. The report didn't ban them outright. It did something more effective. It told legislators, donors, and licensing boards where to point the money. Meanwhile, another player moved in lockstep. John D. Rockefeller's General Education Board, a philanthropic engine with a clear philosophy, began funding medical schools that matched Flexner's template. Grants came with strings: build laboratories, hire salaried professors, integrate with teaching hospitals, and align with state licensing reforms. Schools that couldn't afford the upgrade path faced a choice that wasn't really a choice: close, merge, or fade. Stakes were immediate and human. In the following years, more than half of the medical schools in the United States closed or consolidated. The heaviest losses landed on independent, community-tied institutions, especially those serving black students and women. A handful survived, Howard and Meharry, for example, but only after conforming to an expensive model that limited class sizes and narrowed curricular scope. The pipeline for black physicians, already thin, shrank further, with consequences that echo in health disparities to this day. What counted as scientific was defined with a sharp edge. Germ theory and laboratory biomedicine stood at the center, rightly elevating hygiene, bacteriology, and clinical rigor. But that center crowded out traditions built on empirical herbal practice, nutrition, and manual therapies that rarely produced patentable compounds or lab revenue. The report cast whole plant preparations as imprecise and non-quantifiable, while extractable, isolatable molecules fit the new math. You could measure them, market them, and protect them. Action followed the paper trail. State boards, guided by the American Medical Association's Council on Medical Education and Flexner's rankings, tightened licensing requirements that mirrored the new ideal. Accreditation bodies adopted checklists that valorized capital-intensive infrastructure: microscopes and benches, animal labs, pathology museums, and hospital wards wired for bedside teaching. A dean could now answer a donor with numbers: faculty FTEs, bed counts, lab grants, and the donor could answer back with funding, provided the numbers moved up. Microstories tell the cost. In Ohio, an eclectic college with a busy dispensary saw its graduates face licensing barriers. Applications slumped, donations dried up, and by the next intake cycle, the building was leased to a different trade. In the Midwest, a women-led medical college failed to raise money for a hospital affiliation. Without it, their clinical hours didn't meet the checklist. The faculty scattered to assistant roles at universities that wouldn't grant them tenure. What nobody knew at the time, because the incentives weren't yet obvious, was how neatly this model dovetailed with an emerging industrial logic. Laboratories trained investigators to isolate active principles. Hospitals offered controlled settings for trials and for teaching physicians to prescribe standardized therapies. University industry ties, initially informal, would soon formalize through consulting and supply contracts. A culture took hold. The lab bench generated candidates, the clinic validated them, and the marketplace scaled them. The impact was double-edged. On one side, preventable horrors of the pre-lab era receded. Antisepsis improved survival, diagnostic clarity replaced guesswork, and fraudulent diploma mills vanished. On the other, the culling wasn't neutral. Communities lost local healers who blended botanical knowledge with bedside continuity. Pluralism narrowed. The idea of evidence compressed into what could win inside a lab and a ledger. Flexner's writing framed the cull as necessary housekeeping. He criticized overcrowded curricula, underqualified teachers, and clinical training that was more theater than care. Many critiques were true, but the solution set privileged scale and capital. A small college couldn't bootstrap a pathology museum or secure a teaching hospital without outside money. That outside money, Carnegie's intellectual authority and Rockefeller's sustained grants, steered curricula toward pharmacology and away from modalities that weren't easily standardized or monetized. 3 days after one state adopted new licensing language, a homeopathic college dean received a polite notice. Graduates would no longer be eligible without additional laboratory credits and hospital clerkships that the school didn't possess. Within a year, matriculation halved. The remaining students finished under a teach-out plan. Their last commencement felt like a wake. Across town, a university added a gleaming lab wing with donor plaques and a new pharmacology chair who courted chemical suppliers. This was the moment everything changed. Science wasn't merely knowledge, it became a funding architecture. If your outputs were quantifiable, your inputs attracted money. Full-time faculty wrote grant proposals instead of working in community clinics. Journal prestige aligned with experimental designs that required equipment and statisticians. The more you could count, the more you could command. In the aftermath, the American Medical Association's journals, state boards, and accreditation agencies formed a network effect. Standards defined evidence, evidence justified standards. Alternative schools, stripped of legitimacy and starved of funds, failed to meet benchmarks built for a different species of institution. By the late 1910s, the map of medical education had been redrawn, fewer, richer, and tightly coupled to hospitals and laboratories. With the pipeline rebuilt, another truth emerged quietly in boardrooms and foundations. Once you control training, you shape practice. And once you shape practice, you shape markets. The architecture Flexner helped install didn't yet guarantee a pharmaceutical monopoly or a subscription logic, but it set the rails. Lab-centered discovery, hospital-centered validation, and gatekeepers who spoke one language, so that when money arrived with stronger strings, the train would already be pointed in one direction. Building the monopoly, foundations, universities, and patents. While that was hardening in classrooms and hospitals, money built the walls higher. Foundations didn't just donate, they steered. Rockefeller and Carnegie gifts arrived with architectural drawings for how a modern medical school should look, line items for pharmacology chairs, bacteriology labs, and clinical research wards. Endowment letters praised scientific therapeutics, and trustees began asking deans about assay capacity, vivaria, and trial throughput. The language of philanthropy blended with the language of manufacturing. A campus that could isolate, quantify, and publish would get another building. A campus that couldn't would wait outside. Teaching hospitals, once places to learn bedside manner and basic procedures, became proving grounds for standardized interventions. Meanwhile, something else was happening in office suites near the wards. Industry representatives arranged material transfers, faculty signed consulting agreements, and new clinical investigation committees approved protocols that mirrored sponsor priorities. Bedside turned into a test bench. A promising compound would enter through the pharmacy, meet carefully selected patients, and exit in a paper stamped by a prestigious journal. The faculty CVs swelled. The sponsors got credible data and trusted messengers. What nobody said explicitly, but everyone learned by reflex, was the new pecking order. Whole plant remedies and individualized protocols didn't fit the machinery. Extracts and isolates did. You could purify, dose, compare, and eventually patent those. Journals favored discrete endpoints and randomized groups. Departments favored projects that pulled grant dollars. The incentives taught a generation to look for what could be protected and scale. Gatekeeping bodies kept pace. The American Medical Association's Council on Medical Education defined the continuum from classroom to clinic. State boards matched exams to the new canon. Accreditation panels visited campuses with checklists that rewarded capital and conformity. Alternative modalities, already weakened after the education cull, faced one more headwind. No place to stand inside the system that defined evidence and practice. Meanwhile, journals and societies matured into a network effect. Editorial boards overlapped with guideline committees. Speakers at conferences were also authors on pivotal trials. Continuing medical education, required for licensure, drew content from the same pool of studies funded and framed by the dominant model. When a primary care doctor scanned updates, the menu contained what had been cooked in a single kitchen. This wasn't a conspiracy board on a wall. It was institutional gravity. There was one problem that would later become central. Universities were still squeamish about patents. Through the first half of the 20th century, discoveries often drifted into the public domain or moved through ad hoc licensing. But the culture was changing. Technology transfer offices appeared in embryo form, alumni with industry ties joined advisory boards, and administrators started asking a new question when a lab made a breakthrough. Who owns it? The answer snapped into place in 1980. The Bayh-Dole Act told universities they could take title to federally funded inventions and license them. Overnight, research campuses became patent engines, professors learned disclosure forms, tech transfer offices built pipelines from bench to startup to deal sheet, royalties backstopped departments, equity in spinouts dangled as upside. The ethic of publish or perish quietly expanded to patent and partner. IP logic favored certain kinds of medicine. An extractable novel molecule with a clear mechanism slid neatly into claims. A complex botanical mixture didn't. Protocol of diet, sleep, and movement had no obvious fence to build around it. The more a therapy could be reduced to a unique, controllable unit, the more valuable it was on paper and in negotiations. When labs chose projects, that calculus mattered. When deans allocated space, it mattered even more. While that took hold in universities, professional gatekeepers tightened their embrace of this model. The Food and Drug Administration's evidentiary standards leaned on trials that were expensive and sponsor-driven. Sponsors were, by definition, companies that could protect their assets. Evidence became, in practice, a high-cost tournament with patents as tickets to play. A therapy without IP looked like a charity case. Back on campus, relationships deepened. Faculty received unrestricted grants that conveniently aligned with product portfolios. Departments created centers with names like Translational Therapeutics and Clinical Innovation, staffed by methodologists who knew how to design trials that met regulatory thresholds. In staff meetings, a phrase recurred: time to market. It wasn't cynicism, it was survival. Departments that delivered partnerships and overhead kept their lights bright. The more these ties thickened, the more a monopoly took shape without a single memo saying so. Evidence flowed from a narrow set of methods. Training shaped what clinicians believed. Patents filtered what got funded. Journals and societies amplified what cleared those gates. The result didn't need to ban alternatives. It rendered them invisible at the points where legitimacy was assigned. A micro-story makes it plain. A young investigator proposes a comparative study, a standardized botanical regimen versus a new antihypertensive. The IRB likes the safety plan. The department chair asks about funding. The investigator has none. A pharmaceutical sponsor offers to support a different protocol comparing their drug to a weak comparator. The lab needs salaries paid. The calendar fills with the sponsor's study. The botanical idea waits, then withers. By the late 1980s, the university-industry partnership was fully normalized. Startups incubated in basement labs, then licensed back to multinational firms. Professors presented at conferences with disclosure slides that scrolled like credits. Philanthropy still gave buildings, but now donors asked about intellectual property portfolios and licensing revenue. This was not a secret plot. It was a system that rewarded what it measured. And crucially, patents didn't just protect discoveries, they structured markets. A single compound with exclusivity could anchor a department's future grants and a company's quarterly calls. Journals chased the biggest trials because readers wanted guidance. Clinicians relied on guidelines because malpractice courts asked whether they followed them. The loop closed, softly but firmly. With the structure in place, one thing remained: a steady, predictable customer base. Cures would be welcome if they fit the model. But the machinery favored something else. Therapies that patients would take for years, guided by data monitored by clinics, all inside a web owned by foundations, universities, journals, and firms that spoke the same language. The subscription logic, chronic disease as a business model. With the rails laid in universities and hospitals, incentives clicked into place around a simple idea: steady beats spectacular. A curative therapy ends a revenue stream, a management therapy sustains it. Nobody needed to say it out loud. You could read it in business plans, insurer formularies, and the cadence of refill reminders pinging phones at 6-month interval. Start with insulin. For type 1 diabetes, insulin is life-saving. For many with type 2, it becomes part of an incremental escalation. Metformin, then add-ons, then basal insulin, then prandial doses, each step designed to stabilize numbers, not necessarily unwind the disease process. Lifestyle protocols that can induce remission for some patients, dietary shifts, weight loss, sleep correction, targeted movement, don't generate annuities. They require coaching, context, and time. The clinic can bill a visit, the pharmacy can bill a refill. Only one of those recurs month after month, year after year. Hypertension tells the same story in a different register. A person leaves an appointment with a small orange bottle and a plan to check back. Salt intake, stress cycles, sleep apnea screening, and daily movement might lower pressures enough to reduce or discontinue meds. But formularies nudge choices toward low-cost generics first, then branded combinations with rebates attached. Step therapy policies? Fail this drug before trying that one aren't just clinical hedges. They are financial choreography that conditions both prescribers and patients to accept a ladder of lifelong management. Statins, proton pump inhibitors, selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors. Whole categories normalize symptom control for chronic, common conditions. Many patients benefit and some drugs prevent tragedy, but the aggregate pattern is unmistakable. The default is addition, not subtraction. Each ad becomes a subscription, tracked in adherence dashboards, rewarded with medication possession ratios, and celebrated in quarterly reports that praise retention and persistence. Listen to the language on investor days, and it sounds familiar to anyone who has worked in software. Pipelines replace product roadmaps. Lifetime value describes expected revenue per patient over treatment duration. Churn is the percentage who stop therapy. Market penetration is the share of eligible patients on a drug relative to guidelines. These metrics aren't metaphors, they're management tools. Sales teams get goals for starts and stays. Medical affairs teams coach on side effect management to prevent drop-off. Adherence programs text reminders and mail pill organizers with cheery notes because a missed refill is measurable revenue leakage. Pharmacy benefit managers sit at the center of this logic. They negotiate rebates from manufacturers in exchange for preferred placement on formularies, often inside vertically integrated stacks where insurers own PBMs and specialty pharmacies. Think of deals like CVS and Aetna, tightening control over every step. The result is a stack of choices a clinician sees on a screen. Tier 1 with low copay, Tier 2 with prior authorization, Tier 3 with pain. The patient steps through tiers not because each rung is best for biology, but because each rung has been priced and placed to guide behavior. Mails come with coupons that look like generosity and function like loyalty cards. Over time, the system optimizes for predictable refills on predictable products at predictable margins. In April 2018, a Goldman Sachs research note asked a blunt question about gene therapies. Is curing patients a sustainable business model? And answered it with spreadsheets. The report wasn't cartoon villainy, it was arithmetic. A one-and-done cure can shrink the addressable market as incidence falls. A chronic therapy sustains volume. The analysts suggested finding indications with stable incidence and diseases where durable didn't mean done. That memo didn't invent the mindset, it clarified it. When finance officers evaluate portfolios, they weigh risk-adjusted net present value. Annuities score differently than bullets. Clinics feel this logic too. In fee-for-service environments, revenue follows encounters, procedures, and prescriptions. Time-intensive counseling on nutrition or sleep doesn't scale under that code set. 10 minutes to renew a prescription pays, 40 minutes to troubleshoot a nightly routine doesn't. So clinics hire more advanced practice providers to manage panels, layer in protocols, and standardize follow-ups that support medication schedule. Care gaps in payer portals often mean missing tests or refills, not absent lifestyle plans. A micro-story shows the gears. A mid-career primary care doctor builds a panel heavy with metabolic syndrome. He pilots a group visit model for diet and movement. Patients lose weight, several reduce meds. His schedule lengthens, his productivity metrics fall. The hospital suggests he switch to a collaborative care pathway that embeds a pharmacist to optimize polypharmacy. Revenue rebounds. His lifestyle group shrinks to a lunchtime hobby. Nobody orders him to stop. The spreadsheet does. Marketing quietly reinforces habits. Direct-to-consumer ads name symptoms and promise relief in 30 seconds of sunlit kitchens. Disease awareness campaigns expand the perimeter of at-risk. Risk calculators push thresholds lower, guidelines accommodate with earlier starts and broader indications. Once started, stopping feels risky. What if numbers climb? Deprescribing becomes the exception that requires a brave clinician, a motivated patient, and time neither is paid for. None of this denies the real benefits medications deliver. The point is how structures tilt choices. If a health system were rewarded for remission, you'd see chefs on staff, sleep labs integrated into primary care, and walking clubs coded as billable care plans. Instead, you see refill synchronization, copay cards, and payer star ratings partially tied to adherence. The machine wasn't designed to conspire. It evolved to compound what it can count. Meanwhile, something else is happening beneath the dashboards. The longer a condition persists, the more comorbidities appear. One medication begets another to manage side effects, then a third to manage what the second triggered. A patient begins with reflux and ends with a pillbox that looks like a jewelry organizer. Each addition is rational in isolation. Together, they form the perfect customer, a person whose health depends on a monthly ritual mediated by a supply chain. This is the subscription logic at work. It thrives on predictability, rewards persistence, and treats remission as an outlier. With demand swelling and adherence engineered, the next play would be to harden pricing and protect exclusivity. Because a subscription is only as good as the toll engineering you can charge for the gate. Food, lifestyle, and regulatory capture. While subscriptions were being perfected in clinics, demand was being built in kitchens, cafeterias, and corner stores. You can't sell lifelong management without lifelong conditions. And conditions don't just appear. They're nudged into being by what we eat, how we move, how we sleep, and what our rules reward. Start with sugar. In the mid-20th century, industry money flowed into academic debates over what truly fueled heart disease and metabolic breakdown. Funding steered attention towards saturated fat and away from refined carbohydrates. That pivot didn't just shape a few papers, it shifted national guidelines. Low-fat became the banner. Food companies answered with low-fat products that were high in sugar and refined starches. Snack bars, yogurts, cereals, and sauces wore health halos while spiking insulin and training palates for sweet. Supermarket aisles filled with claims. Heart-healthy, cholesterol-free, light. The result? People ate more often, craved more, and rode daily blood sugar roller coasters that set the stage for weight gain, fatty liver, and type 2 diabetes. Meanwhile, processed foods industrialized bliss. Food scientists tuned salt, sugar, and fat to bliss points that maximized desire without tipping into satiety. Portion sizes crept upward. Plates at chain restaurants became platters. Cheap commodity inputs, corn, soy, wheat, were transformed into endless variations of the same shelf-stable calories. A frozen-in tray could sit for months and still taste engineered fresh after 5 microwave beep. The household budget stretched, but bodies adapted in ways that clinic dashboards would later capture as elevated A1CS, triglycerides, and blood pressure. Built environments played their part. Post-war development patterns favored cars over feet. Sidewalks disappeared, commutes lengthened. Big box stores replaced corner grocers, school recess shrank, sleep eroded under shift work, screens, and stress. Cortisol stayed high. Even people who wanted to move struggled to wedge it in between traffic, 2 jobs, and caregiving. The default day was sedentary by design, not by defect of will. Labels tried to talk both sides of the mouth. On one line, they listed grams and percentages. On the front, they flashed whole grain, natural, low fat, or zero trans fat, even when the serving size was an illusion and the metabolic hit was heavy. Energy drink sounded sporty, not like liquid candy. Breakfast biscuit sounded British, not a cookie. Add a cartoon character, a tie-in toy, and a back-to-school promotion, and you've built a habit with a shelf life of years. Behind the shelves, the rulemakers and the regulated often shared resumes. Advisory panels that wrote nutrition guidance included experts with industry research ties. Agency heads left for board seats. Board members arrived to sit on panels. It wasn't always corrupt, it was normalized. When conflicts were disclosed, the machine still moved, because replacing an expert bench is hard and cheap calories have powerful lobby. The revolving door turned quietly, and definitions shifted by inches that mattered. How to count sugar, what qualifies as fiber, when natural flavors, obscure formulations, how big a serving really is. Marketing filled gaps left by policy. Direct-to-consumer advertising for drugs named the consequences: heartburn, indigestion, cholesterol, joint pain, while food advertising named the pleasures that led there. One screen promised comfort with whipped cream peaks, the next promised relief with a once-daily pill. The whole week became an elegant duet: induce, then reduce, provoke, then palliate. By Friday, shoppers reached for both, the family pack and the pharmacy bag. When confusion reigned, industries prospered. A micro-story. A mother stands in a fluorescent-lit aisle at 9 at night, reading two boxes. One says made with whole grains, the other low-fat. She chooses both, believing variety covers bases. 2 years later, her doctor explains pre-diabetes, prints a handout, and starts metformin. Nobody lied to her explicitly. The structure simply rewarded products and messages that kept her hungry and tired. As chronic conditions surged, pricing power downstream increased. Every new diabetic meant a long horizon of monitoring strips, sensors, medications, and visits. Every hypertensive meant decades of refills. Demand wasn't a wave that crashed, it was a tide that kept rising. And when insurers balked at costs, another part of the system had leverage. Point to personal responsibility, point to guidelines, point to evidence, and keep formularies stable. Regulatory capture didn't have to be dramatic. It looked like comment periods where trade groups submitted binders. It looked like standards that were hard for small producers to meet but easy for conglomerates. It looked like pilot programs that favored vendors with existing contracts. Even well-meaning officials faced asymmetric information. Companies arrived with teams, data, and draft language. Public health advocates arrived with passion and a few staffers. The resulting rules often tilted toward what was measurable for manufacturers and manageable for agencies, not what was metabolically sound for families. Meanwhile, physician training rarely covered nutrition beyond a few lectures. Counseling time was scarce. Food deserts and food swamps complicated every eat better message. The easiest calories remained the worst deal for long-term health, and every month that a patient's markers stayed just above target was another month the subscription logic could do its work: dispense, remind, refill, repeat. Here's the hinge: none of this required a smoky back room. It required incentives lining up across sectors: food, advertising, urban planning, and healthcare, so demand creation and disease management reinforced each other. The more confused the label, the more likely the sale. The more exhausted the patient, the more likely the prescription. And once the prescription started, the system had 100 ways to keep it going. With demand engineered and normalized, the next move was to lock in price and exclusivity. Because a subscription model isn't just about how many people need the gate. It's about how high you can set the toll and how long you can bar competitors from building another entrant. Patents, prices, and the orphan playbook. With demand normalized, the game shifted to toll setting and gatekeeping. Pricing power lives in exclusivity, and exclusivity lives in patents. Not just one patent, an orchard of them. A single active ingredient can sit under a canopy of secondary claims: new dosing schedules, novel delivery devices, crystalline forms, manufacturing tweaks, even pen colors that tie to device patents. Each branch buys time. Each month of time is measured in revenue targets, not days on a calendar. Take evergreening in its pure form. A blockbuster reaches the edge of its basic patent. Suddenly, filings appear for a citrate salt here, a buffered formulation there, a prefilled injector with a proprietary thread, a no-needle sensation claim based on a bevel change. Competitors clear the molecule, but they still meet a thicket. Litigation follows. Settlements set launch dates years out. On paper, the science advanced. In the pharmacy, the box on the shelf barely changed, while list prices rose and discounts hid in shadows. Sponsors call this life cycle management. Health plans call it budget pressure. Patients call it a New Year's deductible that wipes a checking account in one afternoon. Meanwhile, internal teams celebrate defensive wins because they mean another quarter of premium pricing. A micro-story. A hospital pharmacist switches a patient from a familiar injector to a new and improved pen. The dose is identical. The copay doubles. The improvement: a dial that clicks more softly, and a patent that clicks for longer. Orphan drug policy adds a different engine. In the 1980s, lawmakers wanted to help patients with rare diseases that the market ignored. They created the Orphan Drug Act with incentives: 7 years of exclusivity, tax credits, fee waivers, and sometimes priority review. For true orphans, it worked. Treatments appeared where none existed. But companies learned a second move: define smaller and smaller subgroups, carve indications into niches, and stack exclusivity. A medicine for a few thousand people can carry six-figure annual prices because there's no substitute and insurers can't say no without headlines. Over time, A drug can accrete multiple orphan protections across slices of a broader condition, each slice a lock on a slightly different door. Biologics amplify the moat. Unlike small molecules, which generics can copy atom for atom once patents expire, biologics are complex proteins made in living cells. Copying them creates biosimilars, not generics, and regulators require proof of no clinically meaningful difference. Then there's an extra bar, interchangeability, for automatic pharmacy substitution. Each step adds cost, time, and uncertainty. Layer on-device patents around pens and pumps, add trademarked brand equity, and the originator keeps a wide lane for years after nominal exclusivity ends. The list price can climb while net price dances behind rebate curtains. Shoppers see only what leaks through. Enter pharmacy benefit managers, the brokers of this market, often owned by the same insurers that pay the bills. They negotiate rebates, design formularies, and control who gets prime shelf space in the electronic prescribing window. Manufacturers pay to be preferred. Plans tout savings off inflated list prices. The spread, what's paid, what's rebated, what's kept, confuses everyone except the spreadsheets that reconcile it. Doctors see tiers and prior authorization. Patients see coupons that magically neutralize copays for the preferred brand, while a clinically similar competitor sits 2 tiers higher with bureaucratic tripwires. The sickest patients become bargaining chips in rebate poker games they never chose to play. Watch the insulin market to see all these forces converge. The core molecule is old, but device patents, incremental analog tweaks, and a rebate war kept list prices climbing for years, while net prices were hidden in contracts the patient never sees. Biosimilars trickled in slowly. Interchangeability took time. Plans preferred products that fed the rebate machine. Patients who couldn't navigate assistance programs rationed doses, then showed up in emergency rooms with ketoacidosis. Congress hauled executives into hearings. Prices budged in public while contracts hummed in private. The subscription model didn't blink. It just adjusted copay cards and replenishment schedules. The United States stands out globally because other countries set reference prices, bargain nationally, or refuse drugs that don't meet cost-effectiveness thresholds. Here, fragmented payers, protected exclusivities, and legal firepower sustain higher list prices and intricate rebate flows. Manufacturers argue that those margins fund research and development. Critics point to shareholder returns, buybacks, and marketing budgets that dwarf trial costs for many indications. Both can be true in pieces. What matters to a family at the counter is the number on the receipt and whether the cheaper clinical option was ever offered. Then come the specialty plays. A gene therapy launches at $1 million per dose. To make it palatable, payers and manufacturers discuss annuity payments tied to outcomes. If the effect wanes, payments pause. If it holds, the stream continues. It sounds like accountability, and sometimes it is. It also wraps cures in financial products that echo the very subscription logic the therapy threatened. If a one-and-done acts like a bond on a balance sheet, the system has converted a cure into a managed cash flow. Legal strategies knit the perimeter. Patent term extensions claim regulatory delay. Citizen petitions to the Food and Drug Administration slow competitor approvals with safety concerns that read like stall tactics. Authorized generics appear to undercut true generics at launch, splitting the market and softening price drops. Pay-for-delay settlements, carefully structured to skirt antitrust heat, push competition back a fiscal year or 3. Every maneuver buys time, and time buys revenue. Micro-story lands the point. A rheumatology patient does well on a biologic whose exclusivity just lapsed. A biosimilar arrives 20% cheaper. The plan keeps the originator preferred because the rebate is richer, making the net price to the plan lower than the biosimilar's sticker. At the counter, the patient's copay is based on list price, not net. She pays more to stay on the drug the plan prefers for reasons she'll never see. Everyone says value, but no one means the same thing. This is the orphan playbook and its cousins at work. Stack protections, shape competition, price to the brink of outrage without tipping over, and route savings through channels the patient can't audit. It doesn't require malice. It requires mastery of rules written to reward innovation and a tolerance for side effects measured in household budgets. The cure isn't absent. It's often just fenced, financed, and when necessary, fractioned into niches that keep the toll booth staffed. The hospital insurance money loop. While patents set tolls, the delivery system learned to print tickets. Hospitals and insurers built a loop where volume, codes, and contracts turned sickness into steady revenue. no matter who technically paid the bill. Start with fee-for-service, the backbone of the loop. Every service has a code. Every code has a price. More codes mean more revenue. A clinic visit becomes 3 codes when you add a test and a minor procedure. A hospital stay becomes a forest of line items, pharmacy, imaging, supplies, therapy minutes. Nobody needs malice to inflate, they just need a target. Managers track relative value units. Clinicians feel the nudge to do just one more reimbursable step. Preventing problems pays once. Managing problems pays again and again. Diagnosis-related groups tried to tame this by bundling inpatient stays into flat payments keyed to diagnoses. In theory, DRGs reward efficiency. In practice, they incentivize coding acuity up. If a pneumonia case qualifies as with complications, the payment rises. Documentation specialists join care teams to capture severity. The care may be unchanged. The chart evolves so the bill does not leave money on the table. Meanwhile, the charge master, the sticker price list nobody pays, bloats into a fiction that still matters. Discounts are negotiated off those fictions, and patients out of network or with high deductibles can be charged against numbers set to be discounted, not lived with. Nonprofit hospitals grew by absorbing physician practices. The pitch to independent doctors was simple: sell your practice, get a salary, lose the headaches. The hospital gains downstream referrals, facility fees, and control of scheduling. A blood draw that used to happen in a small office now occurs in a hospital outpatient department, which can legally add a facility fee. Same nurse, same needle, new code, bigger bill. The patient pays more for geography. The system books growth without doing more medicine. Surprise billing exposed one seam in the loop. A patient books a surgery at an in-network hospital, believes they are covered, and then receives a bill from an out-of-network anesthesiologist group they never met before the mask. Laws narrowed this practice for many settings, but facility fee loopholes and carve-outs remain. Hospital-based clinics can charge like hospitals even when they look like offices. Site of service becomes destiny for a bill. Vertical integration tightened the loop further. Insurers bought pharmacy benefit managers and clinics. PBMs acquired specialty pharmacies. Health systems launched insurance products. Data platforms stitched it together. The CVS-Aetna merger became the emblem. The insurer, PBM, retail pharmacies, and clinics under one roof. In one stack, a patient's premium, clinic visit, prescription, and refill all travel inside related entity. Claims data predict risk, care managers nudge behavior, formularies steer drugs, owned pharmacies capture margins. A closed loop can coordinate care. It can also coordinate capture. Watch a micro-story unfold. A woman visits a hospital-owned primary care clinic for routine follow-up. The clinician orders 2 labs and a screening electrocardiogram. The hospital bills a facility fee for the visit, a professional fee for the clinician, a technical fee for the electrocardiogram, and separate line items for laboratory processing, all at hospital outpatient rates. Her plan applies the deductible to each. The same care in an independent office would have been a fraction. She calls the billing office. They explain it's standard. She pays on a plan with interest. Meanwhile, outcomes rarely drive dollars. A cardiology group can earn more by placing stents and interpreting echocardiograms than by sitting with patients to redesign meals, sleep, and stress patterns. A pulmonology clinic earns more by managing inhalers and testing lung function than by coordinating mold remediation and workplace accommodations. Even when clinicians want to do the slow work, the schedule template and revenue models say otherwise. Hospitals call themselves community anchors, and many are. But the accounting treats community benefit as a line to justify tax exemption, not a mandate to reduce bills or expand unprofitable services. Charity care exists, then gets offset by inflated list prices and discounts. Expansion strategies focus on service lines with favorable margins: orthopedics, cardiology, oncology. Pediatrics and mental health lag because reimbursements are thin. New towers rise with glass and light. The emergency department waits fill with people who can't find a primary care appointment that fits their job. Insurers market narrow networks as cost control. They steer to preferred hospitals, negotiate lower rates, and still raise premiums because underlying prices and utilization keep climbing. They deny or delay high-cost items to protect margins, approve lower-cost alternatives, and tout care management. Patients experience it as phone trees, prior authorizations, and a sense that someone invisible is rationing with a spreadsheet. Clinicians experience it as faxes, portal messages, and hours on hold. Data glue it all together. Risk scores predict who will cost more. Care pathways standardize responses. Gaps in care. Alerts prompt colonoscopies, mammograms, and medication refills. Some essential, some marginal, all measurable. Plans earn quality bonuses when metrics move. Hospitals earn bonuses when readmissions fall within windows. Clinicians earn bonuses when patients meet adherence targets. Few bonuses reward deprescribing or remission. The loop favors what it can tally and bill. There are bright spots. Bundled payments for joint replacements that reward fewer complications, primary care capitation that pays for messages and group visits, hospital-at-home programs that reduce infections. But when these models threaten high-margin service lines or cut into fee-for-service volume, they hit friction. Pilots stay pilots. Scale weight. Final micro-story closes the circuit. A diabetic man on multiple medications is flagged by his insurer's data team. He receives a call offering a pharmacist consultation through an insurer-owned clinic. The pharmacist optimizes his regimen using the plan's preferred drugs. Adherence rises. The PBM collects rebates. The insurer reports improved quality scores. The man's A1C improves modestly. His premiums rise next year. Everyone in the loop met their metric. Nobody got erasing to help him leave the loop, marginalizing non-patent medicine. While the hospital insurance loop perfected billing, another project worked in the background. Clear the lane by narrowing what counts as medicine. After the education cull, alternatives didn't vanish overnight. They were pushed to the edges, redefined, reclassified, and regulated into quiet. Start with the immediate post-Flexner fallout. Homeopathic and eclectic colleges lost legitimacy, and with it, applicants and donors. States aligned licensure with the new curriculum, so graduates from surviving alternative schools met boards that wouldn't recognize their hours or clinics. Commercial became a scarlet letter. Without hospital affiliations, these colleges couldn't offer sanctioned clerkships. Without clerkships, they couldn't place students. Without placement, fundraising dried up. Laboratories and beds were the new currency. If you couldn't buy them, you couldn't speak. Osteopathy and chiropractic faced a different path, survived by compromise. Osteopathic schools shifted toward biomedical curricula, added pharmacology, and sought hospital ties. Over decades, osteopaths won prescribing rights and hospital privileges in many states, converging with mainstream practice so thoroughly that the public often couldn't tell the difference. The price of entry was alignment, fewer unique modalities, more shared codes. Chiropractic held to spinal manipulation and musculoskeletal care, but fought perpetual scope battles. States carved narrow lanes, insurers codified maintenance care not covered. Chiropractors learned to navigate pre-authorizations and visit caps that kept them corrective, not comprehensive. Herbalism drifted from medicine into the category of food. In the United States, supplements don't require pre-market approval the way drugs do, which sounds like freedom until you follow the consequences. You can sell a capsule, but you can't claim it treats a disease without triggering drug rules you can't afford. Labels hedge with supports and promotes. Efficacy language is policed. Quality varies. Serious research funding is scarce because there's no patent fence to justify the outlay. A clinic can suggest an herb. A prescriber can't easily bill for the coaching it requires. The result is a parallel market, lively but disconnected from the systems that define standard of care. Then came prosecutions and publicity campaigns. Mail fraud statutes and advertising rules targeted claims that strayed into disease treatment. Some cases protected the public from real harm, many chilled speech across the board. Newspapers ran quack columns naming bad actors alongside anyone outside the pharmacologic mainstream. Professional societies issued position statements that dismissed entire categories, homeopathy most of all, as inherently non-evidence-based, full stop. The nuance where an herb worked, where it didn't, rarely made it past editorial cuts. In clinics, clinicians learned a safer reflex. Avoid recommending anything that could be construed as stepping outside guidelines, because a complaint, even a frivolous one, costs hours and reputation. Insurance design did the quietest damage. Benefits favored procedures, prescriptions, and facility-based services. Acupuncture might be covered with tight limits. Nutrition counseling often required a diabetes or kidney disease diagnosis. Health coaching sat outside the fee schedule. Higher copays and exclusions nudged patients away from time-intensive, non-patent care. A person could get a proton pump inhibitor with a small copay the day they asked, but paying out of pocket for a few months of reflux coaching felt extravagant. Even when patients wanted alternatives, the benefit design ran interference. As universities embraced tech transfer, randomized controlled trials became the single passport. They are powerful tools, but they're expensive and tailored to isolated interventions. One molecule, one dose, one outcome window. Whole plant therapies, combined lifestyle protocols, or individualized regimens struggle in that frame. Without sponsor funding, few trials launch. Without trials, guidelines won't recommend. Without recommendations, insurers won't cover. Without coverage, clinics don't adopt. The circle closes. The lack of evidence isn't always lack of effect. It's often lack of a business case to generate the evidence at the required scale. Micro-stories make the edges visible. A family doctor in a rural county watches her patients cycle through reflux meds. She pilots a food-first protocol, late meal curfews, trigger mapping, weight shifts, sleep elevation. Refill rates fall, symptom diaries improve. She asks the local hospital to support a group visit program. The answer: no reimbursement codes that cover the time, no luck. She keeps doing it off the side of her desk. Her quality dashboards don't capture fewer refills as success. They flag gaps when patients don't hit adherence targets. Another, a cancer center dietitian, wants to test a botanical blend alongside standard care for nausea. The IRB likes the safety monitoring. The grants office asks about intellectual property. There is none. A manufacturer of a new antiemetic offers funding for a comparative trial against an older drug, not food-based options. The center needs overhead. The dietitian's project returns to a file folder that gets heavier each year. Public perception hardened through repetition. Late-night talk shows mocked crystals and cleanses, and some deserved it. But the ridicule splashed beyond fringe practices onto credible non-pharmacologic care. Alternative became a single bucket. Patients learned to lower their voices when asking about herbs. Clinicians learned to answer with a printed handout on drug interactions and a polite pivot back to standard regimen. Meanwhile, professional identity narrowed. Young clinicians trained in systems where success meant guideline adherence and trial literacy. Few curricula taught detailed nutrition, sleep physiology, or stress interventions in ways that matched the rigor of pharmacology. Those who wanted that skill set sought it after hours, paying out of pocket for courses the system didn't value. When they tried to bill for the work, codes didn't fit. When they asked for time, schedules didn't budge. The net effect wasn't a ban, it was a margin. Alternatives survived, but as boutiques or side gigs, often paid for in cash by people with time and means. The patients who most needed low-cost, root-cause care, those juggling multiple jobs, food deserts, and chronic stress, met a benefit design that pushed pills and procedures first. If they asked for different, they hit a wall of not covered and no code. By erasing rivals through standards, benefits, and culture rather than explicit prohibition, the system kept its cohesion. It could claim openness, show us the evidence, while setting the price of admission at a level only patent-backed products could pay. And with rivals muted, the next gatekeeper gained even more power, the trial and publication apparatus that decides what counts as knowing. Evidence, trials, and the publication bottleneck. With rivals muted, one gate became decisive, the clinical trial. On paper, the randomized controlled trial is medicine's truth machine. In practice, it's a fortress with a cover charge most therapies can't pay. The rule is simple. The more isolated the intervention and the tighter the endpoint, the cheaper the path to a clean result. A standardized pill fits. A multi-component protocol, a botanical blend, or a food pattern does not. Stakes first. What crosses this gate writes guidelines, controls formularies, and earns coverage. If a therapy never reaches a pivotal trial, it barely exists in the eyes of payers and professional societies. Patients feel the absence as silence in exam rooms. Clinicians feel it as liability if they stray from published pathways. And because trial costs run into the tens or hundreds of millions, funders choose assets they can protect: patents, exclusivities, brand. Evidence begins to rhyme with ownership. Now the action. Trial design is where advantage hides in plain sight. Endpoints decide winners. Pick a surrogate marker that moves quickly: cholesterol, A1C, tumor size, and you can post results in months. Hard outcomes, heart attacks, strokes, mortality, take years and thousands of participants. Comparators matter too. Test your new drug against placebo instead of the best generic, and you maximize the chance of a headline. Run the trial in populations most likely to respond, and the effect size swells. Shorten the window, and adverse events may not have time to surface. None of this breaks rules. It bends them toward a sponsor's goal, statistical significance that sells. Meanwhile, the price tag excludes challengers. A university team that wants to test a whole food intervention across clinics needs kitchens, coaches, months of follow-up, and no clear intellectual property. Reviewers ask about funding. There is none. A sponsor with a pill will fund a study that the Food and Drug Administration accepts because approval opens a market. The food trial dies in a committee room without a villain, only a spreadsheet. Publication is the second lock. Top journals prefer large, clean, sponsor-backed trials with tidy p-values and graphics that travel, often authored by teams with disclosures that scroll like film credits. Negative or inconclusive results often languish. If a company runs 5 similar studies and 3 fail while 2 succeed by chance or design, the successes move first. The failures appear years later in smaller journals or not at all. Meta-analysts try to correct for this, but they can only include what exists in public. The signal the average clinician sees is brighter than the underlying truth. Ghostwriting oils the gears. Medical writers craft manuscripts from sponsor data, academic authors lend names and credibility. Key opinion leaders, respected clinicians with lecture circuits, present the findings at conferences, often with disclosures that scroll quickly and ties to the very sponsors funding the pivotal trials. Advisory boards set guideline thresholds soon after, citing the new trial. By the time a generalist reads the update, the narrative is tight. High-quality evidence supports use in broad populations. The caveats live in appendices and supplementary tables few have time to parse. Then there are safety signals which move at their own pace. A drug launches on the back of short to medium trials. Real-world use reveals patterns, rare heart issues, subtle cognitive effects, dependency risks. Signals wobble in databases, then sharpen. Post-marketing studies lag behind prescriptions by years. Companies argue that benefits outweigh risks. Regulators weigh evidence amid pressure from patients who feel better today. Withdrawals, when they come, arrive after millions of person-years of exposure. The timeline of harm never syncs with the timeline of revenue. Consider a micro-story. A busy internist reads a pivotal trial showing a new drug lowers a lab marker far more than an older generic. The trial ran for 24 weeks, excluded patients with common comorbidities, and used a dose titration protocol not feasible in her clinic. The abstract shines, the supplement lists caveats. Pressed for time, she follows the guideline and prescribes. Months later, an observational study hints at side effects in exactly the patients she sees. Adjusting course means arguing with a prior authorization bot trained on the original headline. Design bias is not limited to endpoints. Run-in periods wash out patients who cannot tolerate early side effects, making the remaining group look sturdier. Dosing regimens can disadvantage the comparator. Composite endpoints bundle wins and losses into a single metric that tilts positive when minor improvements outnumber major harms. Statistical plans pre-specify analyses. Interim looks let sponsors stop early on a win. The methods are public, but their consequences hide in technicalities most readers breeze past. Publication bias meets marketing in the gray zone between science and story. Abstracts emphasize relative risk reductions, 30% lower risk, without mentioning that the absolute drop was 2 points. Subgroup analyses, post hoc, become press releases when they flatter a demographic with buying power. Journals demand registration and transparency, and compliance has improved. But selective emphasis persists because humans, not just algorithms, write titles and choose what to feature. Cost also shapes who gets studied. Pediatric populations, pregnant patients, and the very old are underrepresented. Complex multimorbidity cases, the real world, are hard to randomize and expensive to follow. Lifestyle arms rarely appear because adherence is a variable no sponsor can control and no regulator rewards with exclusivity. So clinicians manage the consequences of gaps built upstream. A therapy that looks great in a trial stumbles in a clinic where food insecurity, shift work, and stress live in the chart as footnotes. Impact lands in 3 places. First, what gets funded and published becomes the standard, even when alternatives might match or beat it in messy life. Second, the apparatus trains clinicians to think in molecules, endpoints, and algorithms, their tools sharpened where the light is brightest. Third, patients inherit a menu shaped by assets, not just biology. When they ask about non-drug options, the answer often begins with a sigh and ends with, "There's not enough evidence." which may be true in journals and false in kitchens. Cracks do show. Data transparency initiatives push raw datasets into public hands, and reanalyses sometimes shrink celebrated effects to something closer to real life. Independent groups reanalyze and sometimes undercut original claims. Trial registries expose missing studies. Courts pry open documents that reveal ghost plans for messaging. But the machine still hums because every stakeholder has a reason to keep it running. Regulators need submissions, journals need citations, universities need grants, sponsors need returns, clinicians need guidance, and patients need something now. The bottleneck remains, narrow by design, efficient at scale, and quietly intolerant of cures that do not arrive with claims and codes. Whistleblowers, fines, and what fines do fix. Cracks show up where marketing meets medicine, and the people who see them first often sit in sales meetings, data rooms, or morgue-side conference calls. They sign non-disclosure agreements, bite their tongues, and then one day decide to talk. When they do, the stories trace the same arc. Pressure to grow, language that blurs risk, and a settlement that lands years later without changing the incentives that birthed the scheme. Start with pain, because that is where one of the biggest fractures began. In sales briefings for an extended-release opioid, reps were taught to reassure doctors that addiction rates in properly selected patients were low, vanishingly low, some said, based on thin evidence repeated until it sounded like fact. Field teams targeted high-volume prescribers, funded dinners, and tracked scripts with dashboards that glowed for converters. Whistleblowers described bonus cultures where skepticism was a problem to be solved. Meanwhile, county coroners watched overdose counts climb. By the time prosecutors and state attorneys general assembled cases, entire towns carried grief like weather. The settlements came, stacked and staggering, billions in judgments, bankruptcies, pledges of treatment funding. But inside boardrooms across the industry, a quieter calculation held. The product era that minted those numbers had already peaked. Penalties would be amortized. Nobody went to prison for approving a sales slide. Compliance programs expanded. Training modules grew. Revenue streams shifted to other franchises. The message was not never again. It was never that blatantly again. Move to a drug that was supposed to soothe joints but stressed hearts. Early trial signals hinted at cardiovascular risk. Internal debates flickered. Which data to pool, how to frame events, what to publish now versus later. Marketing pushed superior gastrointestinal safety and relief for millions. Prescribers embraced it. Patients felt better. Then the heart data sharpened. External investigators raised alarms. Withdrawals arrived after years of prescription. Lawsuits surfaced documents that suggested choices about comparators, durations, and endpoints had helped the drug look cleaner than it was in the windows that mattered for approval and sales. The company paid multi-billion-dollar settlements and fines. The industry learned the optics of transparency and the timing of caution. Insulin offers a different lesson: how to extract without illegal marketing. The molecule's century-long story includes charity and patents sold for $1. The modern chapter includes analog tweaks, device ecosystems, and a rebate war that lifted list prices dramatically while net prices, what payers paid after secret rebates, told a different story. Patients with high-deductible plans paid off the list, not the net. Some rationed, some died. Hearings dragged executives and pharmacy benefit managers under hot lights. Everyone blamed everyone else. Announcements followed. Caps authorized generics, patient assistance. But the architecture of list versus net, rebate ladders, and formulary games remained. Publication and promotion scandals repeat with local accents. Atypical antipsychotics marketed off-label to the elderly. Antidepressants with buried youth suicide signals. Selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors ghostwritten into the literature. Seeding trials that looked like research and read like prescriber recruitment drives. Each time, whistleblowers surfaced emails or slide decks. Each time, settlements landed with compliance addenda and promises to police speaker bureaus more tightly. Companies hired chief ethics officers. Sales scripts lost their sharp edges. Forecasts still expected growth. Inside firms, compliance looks like binders, auditing, and a hotline number on a laminated card. It matters, it catches some things, but targets shape behavior more than manuals do. If a brand team must deliver year-over-year growth in a saturated category, they will find legal ways to expand indications, broaden risk definitions, and lean on guidelines to move thresholds. Disease awareness campaigns run on unbranded budgets that do not mention a pill, only a problem more people now realize they might have. Once the diagnosis grows, the market does too, cleanly within the rules. In court documents and congressional hearings, scripts are revealing. No one writes, "Let us hide harm." They write, "Let us position risk appropriately." No one says, "Bribe this doctor." They say, "Engage key opinion leaders." The euphemisms are habits, not slips. They are the operating language of a system where almost every person believes they are helping. Investors funding research, marketers informing choice, clinicians offering relief. While the aggregate result is a tilt toward overuse, under-disclosure, and delayed course correction. Micro-story shows the human math. A junior marketer flags a slide that overstates a relative risk reduction. A manager replies that the figure is sourced from the abstract, that legal already cleared the deck, and that doctors are too busy for absolute numbers anyway. The marketer swallows the discomfort. 5 years later, a deposition asks about that slide. The memory returns with an ache, not a villain's grin. When fines land, stock dips and then recovers. Analysts model one-time charges. Cash reserves absorb shocks. Insurance covers portions. Executives move on, sometimes with bonuses trimmed, rarely with careers ended. New brands enter the pipeline with lessons learned. Do not email that. Do not overpromise that. Hire independent safety monitors early. Disclose relationships on the first slide. The machine refines, it rarely relents. Patients again carry the remainder. They start a drug launched with confident claims, switch when a black box appears, and keep paying premiums that bake in the cost of settlements they never voted on. Clinicians process new safety letters, update protocols, and hope that the next glossy mailer has more humility baked into its font. Whistleblowers keep hotlines lit. Some are thanked, many are sidelined. Fines do not fix incentives, they price them. As long as the expected value of stretching claims, massaging endpoints, or nudging indications exceeds the expected penalty discounted over time, the spreadsheet wins. The real correction would make remission profitable, safety data a competitive edge, and transparency an asset worth more than a quarter's beat. Until then, the stories will rhyme. A product surges, a signal grows, a settlement lands, genomics, data, and precision subscriptions. The model evolves with new tools. Genetics, sensors, and cloud charts promise personalization. They also create a new perimeter, ownership of the map of you. Whoever holds that map can sell services that never quite end and price the journey with the confidence of a subscription business. Start with genetic testing. Spit kits launch curiosity campaigns. Find your heritage, learn a trait, get a fun email about cilantro. Then came health risk reports, scores for cancer, cardiac markers, metabolism. Each report is data and data compounds. Labs store sequences, update interpretations, and push notifications when a variant's meaning changes. It feels like care. It is also a pipeline. A reclassified variant can trigger a consult, an imaging order, or a preventive prescription. The company owns a file that never expires. The patient owns an anxiety that never sleeps. Insurers and manufacturers quietly converged on the same asset, real-world evidence. Claims, pharmacy fills, wearable streams, and laboratory feeds pour into data lakes. Algorithms segment populations by risk, genotype, behavior, and zip code. Outreach becomes targeted nudging. Your genes suggest X, your steps show Y, your refill pattern predicts Z. Some nudges help. Others steer you toward test, drug pairings that keep you inside a brand's orbit. When payers and pharma co-own the pools, the definition of appropriate patient can look like a market segment dressed in biology. Companion diagnostics tightened control. A drug launches with a test that determines eligibility. Without a positive test, no script, with it a green light. The combo can improve outcomes by avoiding mismatches. It also locks demand to a proprietary path. The test is billable, the drug is billable, the follow-up scans are billable. If another company wants to compete, it must build or license a test and navigate IP around biomarkers that now function like gates, not just guides. Gene therapies pushed a strange question into boardrooms. How do you price a cure? The headline numbers, 500,000, a million more startled. To manage shock, contracts propose annuities linked to outcomes, converting hope into a payment stream. If the effect wanes, payments stop. If it holds, payments flow for years. This creates accountability and converts medical effect into a revenue stream timed like a bond. A therapy that should end a relationship instead becomes a financial relationship with reporting, milestones, and renegotiations. Even cures join the subscription logic when finance writes the contract. Precision medicine promised to move beyond one-size-fits-all. In oncology, targeted therapies turned lethal timelines into months and years. Each win mattered, but precision also multiplied lines on treatment charts. Start here after this mutation, switch there after that progression, add a maintenance combo after scans show stability, each step a branded toll on a personalized path. Every fork is a branded choice. Every choice requires another test. The journey becomes a guided tour through proprietary stations. When guidelines update, panels often include experts with research ties to the very stations on the route. Wearables and remote monitoring extend the perimeter into daily life. Continuous glucose monitors transform diabetes care for many, revealing spikes and dips that finger sticks miss. The data let patients learn in real time and let clinics bill for remote interpretation. Hardware subscriptions arrive. Sensors replaced every 10 days, transmitters every few months, cloud platforms renewing annually. Coaching apps layer on premiums. The benefit is real, so is the metronome of recurring charges. Other devices follow: heart rhythm patches, home blood pressure cuffs that sync to apps, smart inhalers counting puffs. Data feed dashboards, dashboards feed interventions, interventions feed adherence programs, adherence feeds revenue. Microstories show the shape. A woman with a familial hypercholesterolemia variant receives a genetic alert tied to a risk score. Her insurer's portal recommends a specific PCSK9 inhibitor with a preferred specialty pharmacy. A button schedules delivery and enrolls her in a branded coaching app. She improves, and the app's badge streak keeps her engaged. 2 years later, a cheaper competitor arrives, but the portal still favors the original because the rebate is better and the app is locked to that ecosystem. She never sees the alternative. Everything already feels personalized. Another, a health system partners with a genomics firm to offer pharmacogenomic panels to all new primary care patients. The promise is fewer adverse drug reactions, better picks. Results park in the electronic record. Order sets appear with genotype-guided defaults that lean to specific brands with dosing convenience. Clinicians appreciate the decision support. Pharmacists manage exceptions. The deal includes de-identified data sharing to fuel research. The research produces publications and, eventually, new branded pairings. Patients consented. They rarely know how many downstream products their saliva will help design. Data governance becomes the quiet battleground. Terms of service bury choices in friendly language. De-identified becomes a legal comfort that technologists know is porous when cross-referenced with other sets. Employers buy aggregated risk scores. Insurers adjust outreach. Marketers tune campaigns. A gene never changes. A database never forgets. Access controls matter, but enforcement is only as strong as the weakest vendor in a chain of integration. Ethically, the tension is raw. Precision tools can prevent harm and spare patients wasted time on therapies unlikely to work. They can also create dependency on systems that meter access by ability to pay. When a gene therapy cures a child and a state cannot afford coverage for the next, politics carry the invoice. When an algorithm flags a neighborhood as high risk and redirects resources, it can save lives or entrench bias, depending on the data that trained it and the profit embedded in the fix it recommends. Meanwhile, investors love predictability. A precision franchise with a required test, a high-cost drug, and a stream of real-world evidence generates guidance that CFOs can defend, lifetime value, churn, and persistence dressed in lab coats. Renewals for platforms, upgrades for devices, and expanded indications for drugs add layers of growth. The vocabulary is familiar again. Uptake, persistence, lifetime value, churn. Personalization doesn't end the subscription. It just personalizes the plan. For patients, the promise and the trap arrive together. The promise is medicine that fits. The trap is a perimeter that charges rent at every turn. Some will walk out healthier and grateful, holding a device they swear by. Others will look at a stack of explanations of benefits, a refreshed credit card statement, and wonder when the billing will slow. The answer in this perimeter is simple. It slows when ownership of your data and your options returns to you. And that, right now, is not how the contracts read. The care that threatens the model, reversal and remission. While precision subscriptions tightened the perimeter, another current kept surfacing in clinics that made time for it. Some chronic diseases bend. Not perfectly, not for everyone, but enough to threaten the logic that expects refills forever. The threat isn't ideological, it's clinical. When markers flip and meds step down, the subscription stutters. Start with type 2 diabetes. Trials in primary care and specialty programs show remission is possible for a meaningful subset of patients using intensive lifestyle protocols. Low-carbohydrate approaches lower glycemic load and paired with weight loss can reduce A1C quickly enough to prescribe sulfonylureas within weeks and insulin within months. Under what? Mediterranean patterns, higher in fiber and unsaturated fats, show sustained improvements in glycemic control and cardiovascular risk markers. Intermittent fasting regimens help some patients restore insulin sensitivity by consolidating eating windows. None of these are magic. All require coaching, food access, sleep repair, and stress tools. Still, case series and controlled studies report medication reductions and, in some, remission, confirmed by A1C below diagnostic thresholds off glucose-lowering drugs for months. Hypertension and weight respond to basics most dashboards don't bill for: salt reduction, steady movement, sleep apnea detection and treatment, and stress modulation. A patient fitted for a continuous positive airway pressure device often sees morning pressures drop within weeks. Strength training 2 or 3 times a week raises resting metabolic rate and improves glucose disposal. Walking clubs turn sedentary evenings into shared miles that lower numbers as reliably as an added drug for some. These are not fringe hacks. They are risk modifiers with evidence that rivals add-on pills in effect size when sustained. Cardiac rehab proves the point in a sanctioned lane. Post-myocardial infarction, structured programs that combine supervised exercise, nutrition, stress management, and social support reduce recurrent events and all-cause mortality. Plant-forward, fiber-rich diets lower low-density lipoprotein cholesterol and inflammation in ways statins also target. Pair them and event curves bend further. But outside the post-event window, similar protocols rarely receive coverage, even when patients hover just upstream of catastrophe. When payments align, behavior changes. In value-based pilots, primary care groups accept capitated budgets or shared savings and suddenly have a financial reason to keep patients out of the pharmacy and the hospital. They hire health coaches, embed dietitians, run group visits, and build sleep and stress curricula. Depression screening pairs with exercise prescriptions. Food prescriptions pair with produce boxes. Dashboards track A1C downtrends and blood pressure step down. Polypharmacy reviews end with fewer bottles. Patients notice the tone shift. Fewer lectures, more plans that fit jobs and kitchens. A microstory lands the feel. A warehouse supervisor in his 50s on metformin, a sulfonylurea, a statin, and 2 antihypertensives joins a 12-week program at a clinic experimenting with shared savings. The first week covers food. By week 3, he's prepping simple protein and veg meals he can reheat after second shift. Sleep logs reveal chronic debt. A new bedtime routine and earplugs move his average from 5 to 7 hours. A home sleep study shows apnea. A continuous positive airway pressure device follows. By week 8, his morning readings fall. By week 10, one blood pressure drug is halved. At graduation, his A1C is under the diabetic threshold. His pharmacist leads a deprescribing visit. He walks out lighter in body and bag. Barriers are stubborn. Reimbursement codes often do not pay for the time it takes to teach, troubleshoot, and adjust. Medical training skimps on nutrition, sleep, and behavior change. Clinicians learn the skills after hours or not at all. Food access is uneven. Telling someone to eat fresh produce without solving distance and cost is a lecture, not care. Adherence support is labor-heavy. Apps help, but high-touch coaching beats push notifications, and high-touch is expensive without aligned payment. Insurers talk prevention, but rate actual programs conservatively. Many require a diabetes diagnosis code before covering nutrition visits, turning true prevention into delay. Employer plans churn members every few years, making long-term savings intangible to the current payer. Meanwhile, formularies and star ratings still reward medication adherence more visibly than documented deprescribing. A clinician who spends 40 minutes reducing a regimen by 2 drugs sees no quality bonus. A colleague who checks boxes on refills does. Culture adds friction. Patients trained to expect pills may doubt food and movement until they feel the change. Clinicians trained to fear liability may hesitate to step down doses even when numbers justify it, worried about rebounds and remote monitoring flags that trigger after-hours calls. Health systems built on procedural margins struggle to celebrate fewer procedures. Yet the cracks widen because results are hard to ignore. Community health centers pilot produced prescriptions and watch hemoglobin A1C curves dip. Self-insured employers open on-site kitchens and gyms and see claims slow. Digital programs that blend culinary skills, sleep coaching, and strength plans publish outcomes showing medication reductions at scale, not just in boutique clinics. Each data point chips at the assumption that chronic means forever. This care threatens the model precisely because it is less billable, less brandable, and less ownable. You can't patent a brisk walk after dinner or a consistent bedtime. You can't run a rebate war on cucumbers. But you can measure remission, celebrate deprescribing, and build teams that earn by keeping people well instead of busy. When policy catches up, when site-neutral payments, nutrition benefits, and outcomes-based contracts that reward remission enter the core, this thread can move from pilot to default. Until then, it survives on stubborn clinicians, motivated patients, and spreadsheets that finally see savings where they used to see loss. Antitrust and realigning incentives, we have the proof that remission is possible. Now the question moves from clinics to rulebooks. Can policy stop rewarding refills and start paying for getting off them? The levers are unglamorous: billing codes, site rules, patent boards, merger reviews, but they decide whether a remission clinic thrives or withers. Start with site-neutral payments. Right now, the same service, an evaluation and management visit, an infusion, a lab draw can cost 2 or 3 times more if it happens inside a hospital-owned outpatient department because a facility fee gets added. If Congress and regulators finish the job of site neutrality, that arbitrage evaporates. A blood test billed like a blood test wherever it happened. The stakes are immediate. Independent primary care and community oncology stop getting undercut by geography, and hospitals lose the incentive to buy practices just to recode visits. Patients feel it as fewer surprise fees and real price competition for routine care. Pharmacy benefit manager reform runs alongside. Mandatory pass-through of rebates to plans and patients at the point of sale strips the illusion of big discounts off inflated list prices. Bans on spread pricing and tight audit rights for group purchasing arms shine light into side pockets. When all compensation is declared as an admin fee and tied to total plan savings, not brand placement, formularies start to list what works best and costs least. Patients experience lower out-of-pocket costs based on net price, not sticker shock softened by coupons that vanish in January. Patent fixes sound technical, but they're oxygen. Strengthening the patent trial and appeal board, more resources, faster timelines, less deference to thickets lets challengers knock out weak secondary patents that exist to delay competition. Tighten standards for evergreening, require meaningful clinical improvement for patentability on new salts, doses, devices, or formulations. Shorten exclusivity extensions that piggyback on marginal tweaks. Limit abuse of citizen petitions that function as slow-roll obstacles. And enforce penalties for pay-for-delay schemes that pretend not to be what they are. Each month reclaimed from gamesmanship is real money for families and leverage for payers to steer to lower-cost equivalents. On pricing, outcomes-based contracts need teeth and better targets. Paying for remission, not just for hitting a surrogate marker, changes everything. Imagine insulin manufacturers bonused when A1C falls below the diabetic threshold and stays there off additional meds, with payouts shared with clinics that deprescribe. For cardiovascular drugs, tie premium pricing to hard events avoided over real timelines, risk-adjusted with transparent dataset. Make contracts portable so patients changing jobs do not reset accountability clocks. And require public reporting on whether these deals saved money or just dressed old prices in new math. Antitrust has to wake up to healthcare's new shapes. Vertical integration sounds efficient. One stack for insurance, pharmacy benefit management, specialty pharmacy, clinics, and data, but it concentrates power to steer, price, and exclude. Regulators should scrutinize proposed mergers with a patient-level lens. Does this raise switching costs, narrow formularies in ways that entrench higher net prices, or turn data into a moat competitors cannot cross? Block or unwind deals where the answer is yes. In parallel, treat data monopolies like utilities. When a platform's electronic health record or claims lake becomes essential infrastructure, mandate fair, secure access and portability that lets independent clinicians and rival tools plug in without tolls that bias care. Payment pilots deserve promotion to defaults. Primary care capitation with risk adjustment and quality bonuses that include the prescribing rates, remission counts, and patient-reported outcomes turns time into revenue and turns subtraction into success. Fund group visits, culinary medicine, sleep clinics, and community health workers with stable per member per month dollars. Pay pharmacies for comprehensive medication reviews that end in fewer bottles, not just synchronized refill. Let hospital-at-home programs bill full bundles when they hit safety and satisfaction marks. And stop penalizing systems when those bundles cannibalize profitable beds. Food is a benefit, not a brochure. Expand medically tailored meal coverage for high-risk patients and produce prescriptions for prediabetes and hypertension. Tie reimbursement to biomarker change and medication reductions verified in the record. Let states use waiver flexibilities to fund food as medicine at scale and evaluate savings on emergency visits, admissions, and drug spend, not just grocery receipts. If numbers move, lock the benefit in. Rebuild trust with transparency. Require plain language price posting that matches what insured patients actually pay, not list prices nobody sees. Make prior authorization criteria public, appeal timelines short, and automatic approvals standard when evidence is strong. Publish the membership and conflicts of guideline panels and demand public comment periods that matter. Open drug and device trial datasets after approval to independent reanalysis with privacy preserved. These steps do not kill innovation. They keep it honest. A micro-story shows the shift. A regional payer flips 2 counties to a new contract. Primary care practices get capitated budgets, bonuses for remission, and codes for group visits and food boxes. Site-neutral rules make their labs competitive. PBM contracts pass rebates through, formularies reorder by net price. 6 months in, A1C curves dip, antihypertensive counts fall, and emergency visits for hypoglycemia drop because deprescribing followed continuous glucose monitor insights rather than adding insulin reflexively. The CFO sees savings in hospital spend that exceed primary care's new checks. The pilot becomes policy. There will be pushback. Systems reliant on facility fees will warn of closures. PBMs will argue rebates fund lower premiums. Manufacturers will say strong patents protect discovery. Investors will predict R&D winters. Some warnings will be sincere. The answer is not to starve care, it is to redirect fuel. Protect truly novel therapies with clear, time-limited rights. Pay fairly for hospitals' safety nets. Keep margins where they buy health, not where they buy arbitrage. Realigning incentives is not a slogan. It is a spreadsheet that pays for subtraction. When rules reward remission, antitrust defends choice, and patents protect breakthroughs without fencing the obvious, clinicians can practice the medicine they train to deliver. Less when less is better, more when more is needed, and always with an eye on getting patients free of the loop. Personal agency in a rigged system. The rules can change slowly. Your next clinic visit is today. Personal agency inside this machine isn't about heroics. It is about small, repeatable moves that tilt outcomes back in your favor while the policy gears grind. Treat it like hard mode, with a map the system didn't mean to hand you. First, anchor yourself with a primary care home. Not a walk-in, not a rotating panel. A clinician or team that knows your baselines, your kitchen, your job, your stresses. Continuity lowers unnecessary testing and duplicate prescriptions because someone is comparing this month to last year, not guessing at a snapshot. Tell them you want a long game, remission where possible, deprescribing when safe, and lifestyle plans that match your life. You're setting the terms. Next, ask for a deprescribing review explicitly. Bring every bottle, prescriptions, over-the-counter, supplements to one visit. The goal is not rebellion, it's reconciliation. Which drugs still have a clear indication? Which were added for side effects of another? Which starter doses never got rechecked? You and your clinician can target one reduction at a time with labs and follow-up scheduled before you leave the room. Frame it as safety and function. Fewer interactions, clearer thinking, steadier mornings. Deprescribing is medicine, not neglect. Build basics that compound and do not require a product page. Food. Design a weekday default you can repeat. Protein, fiber, color, and water before starch. Sleep. A consistent window and a dark room beat gadgets. Movement. 2 strength sessions and a daily walk change insulin sensitivity faster than most people expect. Stress. One practice you will actually do, breathing between meetings, a quiet commute, a short journal. These moves look small because they're supposed to fit in a Thursday, not a fantasy Sunday. Read labels like a contract lawyer. Ignore the front, flip to the back. Scan serving size, added sugars, refined grains, seed oils, sodium. Identify 3 swaps you can keep without misery. Breakfast with protein instead of sugar, a mid-shift handful of nuts instead of a bar, water or unsweetened tea instead of a functional drink. You're not assembling virtue, you're dismantling spikes. Avoid formulary traps by scouting before you need a script. Log into your plan's portal and search the drug list. Note tiers, prior auth flags, and step therapy ladders for the categories you're most likely to touch: blood pressure, reflux, cholesterol, glucose. If a cheaper equivalent exists, bring that note to the appointment. Ask your clinician to write the preferred option by name and strength, or to justify the exception in the same visit. It saves both of you a week of faxes. Watch facility fees like landmines. When scheduling labs, infusions, imaging, or routine follow-ups, ask a single question: is this billed as a hospital outpatient department? If yes, request the same service at an independent site or the physician office. The clinician's order can travel, the bill does not have to. For surgeries and procedures, ask for a bundled price estimate and confirm all clinicians are in network in writing. Boring, yes. Cheaper, often. Use pharmacy arbitrage legally. Compare cash prices at big box, grocery, and independent pharmacies and on reputable discount programs. Sometimes cash beats your copay. Ask your clinician to write a 3-month supply when safe. Fewer fills, lower fees, and hassle. For generics, ask about alternative strengths you can split if the cost per milligram falls. For brand-only drugs, ask if a manufacturer's assistance program exists and apply before the deductible reset. Pull community into your plan. Group visits, peer-led walking clubs, cooking nights, and church basement yoga turn willpower into a calendar appointment. If your clinic offers shared medical appointments, sign up. If they do not, ask them to pilot one and bring names. Food boxes and produce prescriptions might be available through local programs or insurers. A social worker or community health worker can connect dots clinicians often miss. Know your data rights. Ask for your complete medical record in digital form and keep a copy. Check medication lists, problem lists, allergies, and test results for errors. Request corrections in writing. If you wear a device, decide what you share and with whom. Decline connections you do not recognize. When consent screens pop up, pause. You can say no and still receive care. When guidelines meet your life, negotiate. If a pill is recommended, ask 3 questions. What is the absolute benefit for someone like me? How long until we know if it is helping? And what are my options if I want to try food, sleep, and movement first? Propose a trial period with targets, dates, and a fallback. Clinicians respect plans, plans respect calendars. A micro story shows the stack. A bus driver with reflux, high blood pressure, and prediabetes commits to 3 moves. No food 2 hours before bed, a 20-minute walk after dinner, and a packed lunch default. He asks his doctor for a prescribing review and a continuous glucose monitor for 1 month to learn patterns, paid cash if needed. He uses the data to tune breakfast and sleep. 6 weeks later, blood pressure dips, 1 pill halves, reflux fades without a proton pump inhibitor. He schedules the next review and keeps the lunch routine because it makes the route calmer. Agency is not a guarantee, it is traction. Use your clinician like a coach, your calendar like a scaffold, your labels like evidence, and your community like glue. While the system learns to pay for subtraction, you can practice it. And every time a chart shows 1 fewer drug and 1 better morning, you're proving what the incentives still deny. Crisis beat. A family at the system's mercy. A teenager collapses at practice. The ambulance is in network. The on-call anesthesiologist is not. ICU days stack. Facility fees double the office rates. The PBM prefers a brand over a cheaper biosimilar. The father signs every form to keep care moving and learns the vocabulary of denial letters at 2 in the morning. By discharge, the family has a binder of explanations of benefits and a payment plan longer than a car loan. Nobody lied to them. The loop just did what it was built to do. Resolution and broader meaning. Choose remission where you can and demand rules that pay for it. The report that closed schools in 1910, the law that turned labs into patent engines in 1980, the 2018 memo that priced cures like risks, and the mergers that knit insurers to PBMs tell one story. Design beats intention. Redesign the incentives, and the loop can finally serve the cure instead of the subscription.